Hey, welcome back to Lim and Lattice Software Skills series. This is part two of our Meshmixer training. So we're going to go over some of the tools today that are useful for prosthetic and orthotic modifications, but also designing and building sockets, AFOs, or other products. So let's start. We're going to import a couple different models here. So let's actually just select all of these and bring them in. And you can see that pulled up our object browser. So if you come up here to view, you can turn that on or off at any point. So if you just have one object, it's not going to pull it up right away until you have a second one. Whether you import a second one or if you took that and duplicated it, it would automatically open your object browser, but you can turn that on anytime up there in the view menu. So first thing we always want to do, I'm going to turn wireframe off. Click the home here to get back to a standard view, and let's align this model. So edit, transform. I'm going to go to world frame. So world frame will be just X, Y, Z axes, whereas local is relative to the model you brought in. So let's go world and just start rolling this, grabbing and dragging. So we can go that way. On the arrows, the planes will move on that plane, or we can rotate. So let's twist this one into position. And I just click back and forth between the views. So general navigation here, we covered a lot of that in the first video in the series. So check that out if you haven't. If there's anything that's not making sense here to you, it might be covered in that first video. So we've got that in position now. You can see within this transform skill, you can see our measurements here. So this model is 314 millimeters tall, 117 and 147 front to back and left right. So those are good sizes. I know that my scaling is correct. And let's hit accept. And then remember, we can hit spacebar and flip back and forth. So because this was an OBJ scan, we're going to have anything that was drawn on. So this is a plaster model that I had modified a little bit. I did some reductions on it, made some markings, fib head, areas of pain at the distal end, my trim lines I want. So I can use those markings on my plaster model and bring it in. And then what I've personally been doing is taking a fiberglass cast, pouring it, doing any reductions I want, and then I'll pull it into here to smooth it really quick and do any sort of buildups instead of trying to build those on plaster, which can be a little bit of a nuisance. I will do them in here where it's easier, and then I'll move right to designing and 3D printing my actual sockets from this model. So let's go back to the other view for a minute. And then what we're going to do is just hit Control A. Let's start with just a general smooth. So come up here, Control A selects everything, turns it orange, pulls up this menu. We're going to go to Form, Smooth. And you can see as we change that smoothing scale, how that works. You can also do constraint rings. We're going to come back to that with some other tools. That'll make more sense. So one thing to point out, before we do anything, I like to duplicate my models. It keeps a history of them. This isn't parametric like other CAD tools. You don't have a history of being able to slide back in time and change any one thing you did. So I make my own history tree by duplicating models. So with a model highlighted over here, I'll go left side, edit, duplicate, and that's going to create a duplicate of whatever was selected. So I'll keep that original as just kind of a base model, and then I'll work on this new one. If we hit Control A there and deform and smooth, you can see how it now shows us the current model being smoothed in orange, and it also shows us that base model. So anytime it's kind of modeled looking like this, in and out of each other, That's a good thing. That means that you're smoothing it without making any major changes anywhere. You can see if we scroll up, now as that orange model has reduced, we've lost our tibial crest. We've kind of filled our indents in and the pre-tibs. So that's probably going to be too much smoothing to where we started to affect the shape. So if we stay down here, generally under 10 is pretty mild. So let's go with 6 here. And hit escape. And then we can turn off that model. And you can actually click back and forth and see the difference in the smoothness of those. So that covers general smoothing. You can do that at any time. You can do the whole model. You can, if we back up here, just hitting Control Z to go back. You can also just do that on a selected region. So you can take that area and deform and smooth just that part. So a couple different ways to use that. And then if we start looking at things like buildups and reductions, talking about modifications, I'm going to show you first a few ways to do buildups. I'm going to go through 3 of them here. So let's flip back to our other view by hitting spacebar and changing that. And let's do a fibular head buildup. So you can do your select tool, change your size, and you can either try to pick the size that's right, hit escape to get rid of it, or you can even start lower and kind of fill it in. Or the other thing you can do, just kind of pick your apex and then hold Control and roll your mouse wheel up to where you want it. And then from there, you can go modify and smooth boundary. And then just kind of work on finding what you like as far as smoothness. Between smoothness and iterations usually are the 2 that affect it most. Preserve shape, I don't really find you need to mess with too much in other things that might get in the way. So let's say we like that. Spacebar, flip back over to work on it here. So you can work on it in either one. I just find it visually a little more appealing to work without the other stuff after I've used it to select what I want. So first thing, hit escape. You can see that has now created what's called a face group, where it's another color and it's a selectable region. So select tool, double click that color, and it selects just that. I can then double click the other one and it adds that to it, or hold Control and double click and it takes that away, or hold Control and do it that way. So Control is unselect. So first thing we'll do, select, double click that, and then there's 2 different edit menus. So when you're in selection, it's going to pull up that one. The other one here, we've gone through with like transform, some other tools we'll get back to. That's the regular edit. What you want to do some of these is you have to select something and then it pulls up this menu. Let's go edit, extrude. And an extrusion is just going to be taking that selected area and moving it out in the direction you tell it to and the amount you tell it to. So the amount's up here with offset, and you can see you can go in or out. So you can actually do a carving, a reduction that way. You can do a build up that way. So let's call this 3 millimeters, about 1/8 of an inch. And you can look at the edge here. So harden is going to square off and harden that edge. I like to do that just to give me a cleaner view and better selection sets at an upcoming step. So I always go harden 100. And then direction. So most things are either going to be normal or constant. And that's just normal coming off of your face is what they call it. So You can also do X, Y, and Z. You can see that moves that in the X-axis, in the Y. Let's actually accentuate that and show you. Or in the Z, which in this case, our Z-axis, the way it's set up is going left and right here. So actually Z would work, but I'm going to stick with constant on this one, 3 millimeters, and accept that. So you can see now that whole extrusion is a selectable set of its own color. But if I want to select just this inner edge for anything, what I'll do is come over here to Edit and Generate Face Groups. You can see how it creates that. It's also got all these tiny ones showing up. So if you wanted the main body to be its own, you can change that with angle threshold. When you scroll to the left and go smaller, it's going to pick up all those little angles of all of our mesh facets. And if you go bigger, you can get rid of a lot of things based on the angle threshold. So you can kind of just find one that gives you what you're looking for. Generally speaking, the standard, so when you open it up, 10 is going to give you these hard edges separated well. And if this model was smoothed, you wouldn't be seeing all of those. So let's do that. Let's hit select, get a small selector to be able to get in here and just grab this little edge and double click that. And then what we're going to do is hold Control, roll our mouse wheel, and we're aiming to just blend in all these edges and smooth that out. So we'll select that, go to Deform and Smooth, and that's going to just affect the area we have selected. So let's move the scale. You can see in this case, the smoothing scale's not really changing a whole lot after you get past, 5, 6. So let's leave that there and change constraint rings down to 2. It always starts at 3 and smoothing scale starts at 4. So you can see what the different constraint rings do. Let's put it about 50. You can see how it changes, how that actually blends and smooths. So a lot of times 2 is a nice one for things like this. Do that and then hit accept. You can see now we have a nice buildup that's already blended and smoothed in there. So another way to do that, let's delete that model, make a new duplicate. You gotta turn it on before you can do any of this. So edit, duplicate. And let's come back here and look at it a different way. So another thing you could do, select that, smooth it. And let's actually take that and extrude it again. Generate our face groups. And another way to do this, that it's not the best way for something like a buildup, but I'm going to show you this tool because it comes in handy for other things, is let's actually delete out those edges. And then if you double click in here along an edge, it's easier if you turn on wireframe, you can see. So if we pick one of these triangles that's on a perimeter and double click it, it'll fill out that whole perimeter. If you do that in 2 areas that are adjacent to each other, you can actually go edit and join, and those will connect those 2. Now if we go back again and you were to maybe just select a little area of this and a little area here, you can actually do edit bridge, and that'll just build out a connector there. So those tools will come in handy for other stuff. Probably not the best way to do something like a buildup here. The other way that can work well is what's called soft transform. So if we select that area, deform, and soft transform, that's going to be, well, let me show you transform first. So transform is basically like an extrusion without any sort of measurement to it. So you can pull it. What you can do though is have more control of your angles, whereas an extrusion is based on your axes or your normal or constant. When you do a transform, you can actually have a lot of control over this. And if you do it with a soft transform, you get a lot of that same control, but with pre-blended edges. So this can be a really nice way to build things up. Sometimes what you have to do is actually start small. So let's do modify and remove that face group. So sometimes if I'm using that, you actually just want to start small, and you don't really have to smooth the boundary. Sometimes it actually messes it up. So if you're having difficulty with this tool, try not smoothing your boundary. So if we select just that apex and do it, we're going to get a smaller area being pulled and blended. And that region, that area, is your fall off here. So you can see how we can change that. So what you can actually do is take it all the way down and get a good look at how far out you're coming, and then slowly work it up to find the area that you actually want to blend out. The other thing to point out with this tool is shared frame is going to flip your selection set around. So sometimes this is coming off at a weird angle, and shared frame, turning that on or off might help. But sometimes you just have to grab the plane and move it where you want it. So you can do all that. Let's actually just do something real quick here to show you the next tool. So grab that and extrude it. So let's say we have that, and we wanted to blend something in. So we can come out here and grab these edges. And if you leave some of this at the apex unselected, then it's going to keep that height when you smooth it. Whereas if you selected that, then you're actually going to be smoothing all of that down together, and it'll start to take it away. So that can, if you do a build up to a certain height and you want to make sure you keep that height, you just have to unselect a tiny little area in the middle, and that'll keep your max height there. So those are build ups. You can do the same thing with a reduction. Let's do it real quick. Say you wanted to just carve a little pre-tib channel here. Let's extrude that down so you can slide it, or let's go like -3. The other tools you can use here to start blending and smoothing your edges rather than selecting and doing the edit to form, you can actually use the sculpt tools. So these are kind of like your plaster tools. So click sculpt, come up here to brush, and in this case we're going to work with volume because we don't have an inner and outer wall. As we get into building products, we might have to flip that over to surface, which actually changes your selection set. Some of the tools are the same, some go away, but if you're working on like the outer wall of a socket and we don't want to touch the inner dimension because that's the limb and that's what we know we want, we might go to a surface smooth. But in this case, let's go volume. And these 3 smoothing tools here, so bubble smooth, shrink smooth, and robust smooth. So we can grab these, and let's do a bubble smooth, which is going to fill in your low points. Shrink is going to take down your upper edge, and robust is kind of a blend of both of those. So let's do a bubble smooth. You can see what this is going to do here. It's going to fill in that outer edge. And I just kind of use this as like a pre-smoothing sometimes instead of just trying to select it all. If I find that selecting it all and doing a quick deform smooth isn't giving me the result I want, sometimes I'll do a little bit of a sculpting smooth first just to make it work better. And if we did a shrink, that's actually going to cut down from your top edge. And the robust. Sometimes the robust doesn't do a whole lot, depending on what you're working on and what your settings are. So that's one way we can do that. Real quick, we'll just do that. Control and unselect a little strip down the middle, and we'll deform and smooth that. And then if you don't like what you have there, you can always go a little more, bring it all the way out, and just give it a real small final smoothing there. So one final thing, if we wanted to take this model and just change the volume, one last tool to go over here is going to be the offset tool. And this is similar to the extrude in some ways, depending how you use it. So if you click connect here, it's actually going to fill in that edge. Let's make this a little bigger so we can see it. It's actually going to fill in that edge and kind of be like an extrude. If we don't click that, we're actually going to get a second shell. So let's do that. And you can see when we hit accept, it just takes that outer and it doesn't select the inner. So we can go edit, separate, and that would give us two separate shells, an inner and an outer. So backing up, let's say we wanted to make that model we had 2-ply bigger. So I find that a ply of socks is roughly 0.25 millimeters. So that's a 1/4 millimeter of offset at any point, so all around. So this offset is like adding a 1/4 millimeter thick sock. So let's go 0.5, bring that out 0.5. That's going to be like making this model 2-ply bigger. So a real quick way to do a volume change there. You can go bigger, or you could go minus 0.5 to go 2-ply smaller, and then that would give you that. So if you hit escape before you separate, you can always just select, double click, edit, and then separate it after the fact. So that is one last thing you can do there for volume change, in addition to edit, transform, and then you could always scale. So if you wanted to do like a 3% reduction on this model, you could do it in those two planes. So you've scaled it down left, right, front, back. We haven't touched the length. If we wanted to, you could do a length reduction there. You could also do that by a length reduction by size. So you can grab that square and shrink it that way. And you can see we're changing our size Y here. So let's say we wanted to take 5 millimeters off. We could go 300.66, and that'll shorten your model by 5 millimeters. But that's across the whole thing, not necessarily just like an end shortening. The next thing we want to look at, let's turn off the modifying model. Let's pull up this one. So this was a cast that I had scanned. I had it in a jig and used an iPhone scanner to get the inside of a fiberglass cast. So we're going to position this one real quick. And accept that. So you can see, because we scanned the inside, and it's going to be the same if we scan something like the inside of a test socket, which we'll come back to. we scan the inside, we've got our pink and white stripes on the outside, and we actually need to get that turned inside out so we can work on it. But first we want to get rid of all of this extra stuff. So in this case, you can see we don't have anything connecting. So these are actually going to be two separate groups. If these, let's say these were connecting right here, that would all be one set. We would just have to kind of select out and delete some of that to break that connection. Then you can select the inside here, double click it. You can see it doesn't pick everything else. We can hit I to invert and delete. And then if we want to get rid of some of this stuff around and clean our edge up, we can do that. And control, pick up anything we didn't mean to hit there. And then let's delete that. That broke that connection. And one more time, we're going to go I, invert, and delete. So that gives us a pretty decent cleaning on the top. We're going to hit Control A, select all of that, and go up here to the Edit menu and flip normals. So flip normals will turn that model back the other way for you. You can see in this case, I had drawn on the inside of the cast. So let's go Control Z. You can see I had drawn on the inside of the cast, so it picked up those things as well. Those are actually my marks on the limb before casting. So flip that. Now, if you want to get this top edge cleaned up, we can come back to those sculpt tools, go brush, and this is where robust smooth works really nice. So you come up here, get a decently sized selector, and let's turn that strength up. You can see how it takes that whole edge and it just cleans it up and kind of smooths it out. So that's one thing you can use when you're working off of a cast or a scan of a test socket to clean up that edge and give you something better to work with. The other thing you can do is an edit plane cut. When you go into this tool, first thing is this arrow here flips the direction you're cutting, but you can also turn your planes around. So let's go there. The S is going to be snap, and that's going to move along that. So I'm going to turn that off, and I could actually come up here and just cut off the top of this model. If I didn't like what I had, I could set a plane and clean it up that way. And the green is going to create a new face. So that's going to be here, remeshed fill. I could go no fill and keep it open. So let's do that right now and accept that. So that's another way to quickly clean it up, as long as you're not at risk of losing any height or any markings you wanted. If you have this and you need it to be taller to work on it, you can do that edge selection again. Let's actually bring some of that down and then go deform and soft transform. And this is where you can see if we follow the arrow, it's going to come off almost like we had casted in a little bit of flexion there. And because it's the top of the socket, we might not need any other contours besides what we have. But you could turn that, you could move it if you wanted it to come off more upright. So a lot of times that can just give you a nicer edge. Like say you wanted to come in here and do some sort of a condyle carving, you're going to need more space to work on that. So let me just show you what happened there. So as we extended that up, we got these weird triangles that don't match these ones. So what we want to do in that case is actually remesh all this. So instead of doing select all and remesh, which can really bog down the computer, what we're going to do here is sculpt and then brushes. we're actually going to use these. So refine, reduce, and adaptive reduce. Refine is going to make it a bunch of smaller triangles, which we don't really want in this case, because we actually want to just make this even, but we want less triangles so that it's less intensive for the computer to work with. You can actually see the outline of my limb markings. The scanner picked those up and gave them a denser mesh because it was identifying those. So let's go sculpt. I like adaptive reduce. Let's go a pretty big size so that we can just go really fast in cleaning this up. And so let's go like 80-20 and see what that looks like. So that's going to give us a pretty decent, clean, mostly uniform surface. Up high here, if they're a little bigger, it doesn't really matter. There's not a whole lot of definition we need up there. So if we undo some of this and show you, like let's turn the strength down. You can see it's going to leave smaller triangles where strength higher will reduce further. And then if you have the size small, you're just going to be spending a lot of time blending that in. So that's why I like to go with a large size and then dial in my strength to get the size I want on my triangles. Let's go with something like that for this one. And depending on what you're doing, this might not be a necessary step, but there are some things where you definitely need to do this, or if you're exporting this, to try and work with it in like Fusion 360 or some other CAD software that doesn't handle dense meshes well, having a reduced mesh will help. And then you can look at your triangle count down here and see where you ended up. So that's 12,600 almost. That's not bad. That's not too many triangles to work with. So we've got that. That's how you can process the inside of a scan, whether it's a cast or a test socket, same thing. So let me show you a couple more things with this one. We're going to go through that process again here real quick. Get rid of some of these edges. So this was a first test socket going to second, or if you wanted to leave that test socket on your patient and go to definitive, you could scan the inside of that test socket and then work from there. So being able to do that really opens up some options. It's just, you can get creative and figure out how you can best use these tools now. And we will flip normals. And then this is where doing that sculpt and robust smooth and cleaning up your edge is going to be really helpful. Now these, you can see we can kind of just hang out on it and bring those down further. And if we back up, you can see what we did there. So some of this is overhanging too much. So what we would have actually wanted to do there is come in here and clean this up even further before we go to the next step. And that'll just make your life easier when you're cleaning up those edges. So I try to do anything that is past vertical on my inner surface, I try to get rid of. And don't worry about it over selecting here, because what you can do, you're just trying to make sure you get it all, and then you can come to the inside and control and kind of back off on some of it. So let's delete that. Invert and delete. So now you can see when we do this and flip normals here and sculpt. we should be able to get a better edge because we gave ourselves a better starting position on that. So we're going to run through this really quick. And you can turn up the strength and have it go a little faster, but that will deform and kind of distort things more. So it's a balancing act there of, do you spend a little more time on it and go a little slower, or are you willing to maybe deform your trim lines a little bit more? And sometimes that's going to be a matter of what your next step is. So you can see an area like this that's not really even. If we just kind of hang out here and go back and forth, we're eventually going to get ourselves down to a point where that trim line has smoothed itself out pretty nicely. And I'm just holding down on the left mouse button and moving back and forth on those. So you can see that area there isn't doing a good job smoothing up. So this is a good place to use the erase and fill tool like we had talked about in our first video. And that'll just clean up whatever little mesh deformities going on there and get rid of that for us. And if we flip on the wireframe, you can see what's actually happening here. It's taking all those jagged edges and just creating a nice boundary with them. So that would be one way to start building a socket. You could also then clean up stuff. So like here, or like this end, which we had actually done in the first video, was cleaning up this end. So this is going to be the erase and fill tool. And what that'll do is get rid of whatever you've selected and keep your outer boundary. So there's something missing. That's going to be why it's red. So cancel, find what's missing. And sometimes this is where I'll hold control and scroll up just to, if there's any little stuff, it'll go grab that and then erase and fill and kind of get this using the bulge and the scale tools into a position where you like it. So we can do that there. Same thing, we can do that here. If we've just got an area of some roughness, maybe with some holes, say there was a bunch of holes around, this is a quick way to do it. Hit that, erase and fill, and just kind of mask clean that area up. So this is my the top of my lock. You can see it got down into the side that, so we want to clean a little bit of that up. So if we tried that one there, that's not bad. We could try that and then use that scale and that bulge to get us back to a pretty decent spot. So say you wanted to just make another socket out of this one. What we could do, Control A, select that whole thing. Let's just real quick give it a smooth, so 4. Then you could come up here and use this extrude tool again. This is the other way to do it. So you can use it to modify, but if you have an actual whole surface that you're working with, you're actually going to create now a body from that surface. So let's say we want to make a 4mm socket, harden our edge, and that would actually give us now a socket that would be a printable file as it is. So say that could be maybe a 4mm thick inner flexible, and then you could build a frame over that, and that all came from your inner surface that you scanned from your test socket. So that should be a direct swap from test socket to flexible and definitive. Now you can see these edges here, still kind of rough. Let's back up. And usually what we would do to clean up those edges is that sculpt tool. But in this case, it wasn't doing the whole job. So you can come in and turn the strength up and try it again and see if that helps. In this case, it looks like it will. The other thing, sometimes you have to go to this flatten tool. And sometimes that helps to do that. Now you can see that actually does flatten off that surface. So be careful how you use that one and make sure it's giving you what you actually want. But it can help to correct any kind of underlying mesh issues that may be messing up when you go to extrude nicely. In this case, let's just do a stronger, robust smooth here. And this is a step I always do before extruding. I always come in smooth so that I get that nice clean edge. So you see this one's still kind of rough, so we'd have some work to do there. We could also try further deforming. Again, don't deform too much, but we don't want to do that probably in this case because we're going to start losing our shape. So let's try that flatten tool and see if maybe that's the one that's going to help us here. And then I'm going to actually go with a low strength, robust smooth over top of that again. Just so I don't have a crease anywhere. It'll kind of make it into a flare. And you can see in that case that did the job and fixed that edge, so you could go around and do that on the whole thing to clean that up. And here you're getting, we would need to clean up some of this more and smooth this out to get a better finish. So let's go with just a 4. And you can see now we'd have a much nicer finish on our actual socket that we're going to print. One final thing we can do with a model like this, so say you scanned your inside, you got it cleaned up, and you want to take this over to something like Design Studio or Omega or whatever modification software you use to make changes there, rather than trying to make them in Meshmixer. So let's figure out how to fill in the top of this model and turn it more into that cylindrical shape. If you're going to a carver, you could do it. You might need that too. So what we're going to do is select tool, get right there on the edge, select that edge, and then just roll that down a little bit and modify smooth boundary, hit accept. So now we've got that face group. You want to take that and you can do either deform and transform. And let's move that up, and you can kind of just position that wherever you want. And what we're looking for is getting that posterior edge maybe 2 inches above everything else. So you can pull that up there, kind of get it in the angle and the position that's going to be best for you, and hit accept. And then you can come in and just do a plane cut. And you'll see if you go past that edge, it's automatically going to open. So you want that filled in edge right there. Hit enter, and now you have a model that you can go file, export, and send that model where you want it. So the final model we have here is just a poured socket. So I hadn't modified this one. I hadn't done anything. I'd taken a fiberglass cast, poured it, and then I actually put it on the edge of a table. So when you're using an iPhone scanner, they don't do a great job of locking on to a cylinder shape like that. They need something around it. So in this case, I had it on the edge of a bench. It was able to grab that angle there. And I also had just some blocks of 2x4s here when scanning that it was able to grab onto. And then I actually cleaned up some of this in the Scandi Pro app before exporting that here. But we're going to clean up the rest of this and show you how those tools work and just kind of finish out the rest of the tool set here. So again, we're going to get this one into the position. So come back to the plane cut. This is a really good time to do a plane cut. And kind of the same thing in Scandi Pro. They have a plane cutting tool in there that you can use, and that's how I got these kind of clean cut edges there. But you can always come up and just remove away the parts we don't want here. That, and then we could do that erase and fill down here to get rid of the end. So the scanner is kind of the same thing, capturing the, when this is inverted on a table, capturing the distal end nicely is kind of always one of the hardest parts. So in this case, it's a locking limb or a locking suspension. So the distal end of the limb is going to get it kind of set by the shape of the lock anyways. So losing that is not a huge deal. And then let's just come up here. So we're just going to work down this list on the left side and show you everything that's in here. So Meshmix, these tools are going to be just standard shapes that you can bring in. If you drop them out here in space, they're going to be out in space. And if you drop them touching the model, they're going to adhere to it. So I will often use these, drop them out in space, and then that creates a new object here on the left or on the right. So we can select that one. That's that cylinder, edit, transform. And let's say we wanted to mock up a 30 millimeter pylon for some reason. We can do that there. And then this is where I was saying there's the wireframe is going to be a little weird and hard to work with sometimes. So sometimes you might have to remesh some of these shapes, and usually because they're so nice and clean, you can just do the Control-Alt, edit, remesh, and that's not going to bog your computer down too much. Turn that density up and just give yourself more facets to work with on something like that. So we'll delete that. Let's turn off our wireframe. All right, so the other one in here is a plane. This can be helpful. Let's bring a plane in, drop it down, and then let's move that under the limb. So this would be good for something like a foot orthotic or an AFO, because what you can use is this plane in a tool called a tract, and you can actually draw this surface down to your target surface, and that's what this little magnet over here on the right is. So if you click, you got that mesh highlighted, which is your plane. Click the magnet set as target, and it'll turn purple. And then what you can do is go back to your model, sculpt, brushes, attract, and again set your size, your strength. What that's going to do is that when you come from the bottom side of that plane, it's going to pull all that down to it. So you could use that. You can imagine, filling out the heel of a foot and getting a flat heel or flat forefoot. Rather, you could do a kind of a combination of plane cutting it and attracting it to a surface, whether you wanted to remove or add material to make that plantar surface flat. And then you can hit escape to get out of the tool and just click that magnet to get that back. So that is the attract tool. The other ones here in Sculpt, we've gone through the smoothing. Things like drag is going to just grab an area and drag it. Some of these aren't particularly useful. Flatten we already talked about, but we'll do something like that. So that can be useful in other things when you need to clean up and flatten a surface for some reason. Inflates, another way to do a modification like a buildup. It's just not as easy as the other ones. But there are times I will use inflate specifically on building some different socket types. And that's probably it. Move, you might use move sometimes where you can grab an edge and actually pull and deform it. But that's about it for the sculpting tools. Most of those are going to be more on the modification side or just smoothing things out. And then you've got your properties basically work across all of them. So again, symmetry's in there. You can kind of just mess with all these, find what you like, refinement and filters. I don't get too far into any of these just because I don't find I need to. I basically stick with size and strength, and that's about it. So getting in here to the other edit menu, not the selection edit menu, but just the standard one. We've got our duplicate tool we talked about. And again, the other thing with this, always be saving. So Meshmixer likes to crash. If you try to do anything too intensive for your computer, it'll crash. So in addition to making duplicates to track your history, always saving, especially when you're about to do any important step or any kind of processing intensive step. Save before, save after, save frequently. So we've got duplicate, mirror. You can see what we're going to do here. Let's rotate this plane. Control Z. I didn't mean to click that, so Control Z. Let's pull that out. So that's actually going to mirror your model. So you could use this for making covers maybe. Scan the prosthesis, scan the sound side limb, mirror the sound side limb onto the prosthesis as a way to get a really nice shape. And then again, just like the plane cut, that's going to change your direction. So make sure you have that. If something's weird, try hitting that and see if it shows you what you want. You could accept that. And then you could even come in here. Let's see, it's kind of freezing up here. All right, let's come back to this. Now we mirrored it. They're part of the same group, just like when we were offsetting. And sometimes it does not like to grab all that because we have two of them. So let's turn that other one off and see if this works better now. Yeah, so we do that, separate, and now we've got our right and left models separated out. So let's come back to that again. We've got mirror, duplicate, transform we've talked about. I don't really use too many of these. Make solid will show up in some product designing stages, but that's really it. These are more so kind of high-end things that we're just not going to need a whole lot of until we get to really complicated designing. So into analysis, we've talked about the inspector in the previous video, so check that out if you're not sure what that does. But it shows you, just real quick, how to close any sort of holes or remove any sort of floating pieces. Give it a second. We also have a lot of models being built up here. So as you get further in, the memory is being used. And you'll see this is probably, there we go. So don't click a bunch, just let it, if it seems slow, just let it do its thing. So I actually don't want that. Let's undo that. Analysis. So again, measure we talked about in the last one. It's not particularly useful. It'd be nice if it was, but it just doesn't really give us the type of measurements we're looking for. And then shaders. So this one can be nice. You can actually do this one here and turn that transparent if you're trying to look through it and see something else. So that's one way. And you just got to drag another one back over. The other way to see through it real quick is just turn the view off. I find this pink one to be a little easier to see through actually sometimes. But that about covers all of our different tools there. So anything that you didn't see what you were looking for, or you have some questions on it, go ahead and leave a message at lemonlattice.com. Go to the forums and go to design help needed. You can leave a message there, and we can kind of help the community work through anything that comes up that we're trying to figure out. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next one.